365 Sports on this Friday afternoon. We appreciate all of the various guests we've had from different angles of how today has gone on and what's happening with the Big 12, the Pac-12, the Big 10, and more in college football. Dr. Linda Livingstone, president at Baylor, the chairperson of the Big 12 Board of Governors, of course, on the NCAA committee as well that oversees what's going on right now. Dr. Livingstone, first of all, thanks for your time. So has the Big 12 added anybody today?
No, I'm not going to speak to the specifics of any of that, but we, continue to monitor what's going on, and we'll make decisions that are in the best interest of the conference and hopefully college athletics as things move forward. But it's certainly been an interesting day to watch what's happening.
When you look at where the Big 12 conference is, and you were here when Texas OU decided they're leaving, even USC and UCLA, can you try to put into words what the conference has done with what Bowlesby did to react to it and where the conference is today?
Well, it's really been, I've heard some people refer to it as, Phoenix rising from the ashes. I know a lot of people thought the Big 12 was dead after OU and UT announced that they were going to the SEC. But, a credit to Commissioner Bowlesby at the time for his leadership and working closely with the presidents and the athletic directors to identify the four great teams that are joining us this year, Houston, UCF, Cincinnati, and BYU. And then for the presidents and the athletic directors continuing to work together as we selected a new commissioner, and then as we've really kind of navigated what's going on recently, there's just a lot of sense of collaboration and common values that I think have been really, really important to us to help us to hold together and to make decisions that have been really important for not just the immediate success of the conference, but to set us up for the long term and for long-term stability and success. And, there's certainly more than one time in the history of this conference people didn't think it was going to survive. So a lot of credit to those folks that have been around even longer than me that have helped hold things together and really been committed to the conference and its success.
In the long-term picture of college athletics, I mean, the wheel is going to keep spinning and things will keep changing and things will have to mold to new realities. But do you see an end game for what college athletics wants to be with these conferences growing and growing so that it gets to a point where it reaches a stasis?
Well, I certainly hope we get to that point of stasis. I think this drama every summer is hard on institutions, certainly hard on conferences. It's hard on our fan bases. It makes our coaches just crazy, right? And so I do think we need to get to a place of stability. After we get through whatever transpires this summer, will we be at that place? I don't know. I think we've thought that off and on over several years, and we haven't seen that yet. But I do think there's going to have to be a point where things settle down. I just don't know that I could predict when exactly that's going to be. I think at one point I kind of thought once the Power Five all got their media deals taken care of this time around, we would at least see some stability for the next 4 or 5 years until the next round of media deals came up. But of course, no one predicted what was going to happen to the Pac-12 happening this way, even after USC and UCLA left. So I think we're, still going to have to pay close attention and to see kind of where things go in the next several years.
You are, of course, involved in all of the different working groups and committees and all the things you've done with the NCAA as it tries to move into modern governance in college athletics. And there are bills in Congress right now that Charlie Baker has gotten through, that you guys have gotten some senators to do some things. They're different, and we don't know which one will even get to, through committees and all those different things to get onto the floor. Do you think that any of this realignment slows those processes and hurts it in the public eye because people can see that as these are schools just going for a big money grab, why do I need the government to get involved in regulating any of this if they're not going to slow down hurting my team or moving my team to a place that I don't know if I really want them to be?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a really fair question. And we haven't heard any of that yet in the conversations we've been having in Washington, D.C. But as we know, people feel very deeply about their institutions and their college athletic programs. I do think what we're trying to do with federal legislation is to help bring some stability and consistency and, frankly, some protection to our student athletes in regards to the NIL landscape. And I think to some extent, some of that might help with this because it does mean that everybody's playing from the same rule book as it relates to NIL, which is not the case right now. It should be since we have NCAA rules around it, but because the state laws are so different, it makes that a bit challenging. So I think anything we can do at the conference level, at the NCAA level, and certainly in partnership with the federal government to bring some consistency and stability, it helps. But I would also say we've seen lots of consolidation and lots of change in a lot of industries over the last 10 to 15 years as financial models change, as markets change. And so I don't know that it's surprising that it's happening in college athletics because it's happened in lots of other industries. And I think we just have to recognize that things are changing pretty rapidly and we're going to have to adapt as quickly as possible and, frankly, try to be as proactive as possible to get ahead of things also.
Dr. Livingstone, if in fact the news from today and when it is official and the time zones that the Big 12 is a part of, how much of the concerns about travel come up during any of the meetings as you continue to expand?
You know, anytime you're talking about, and this came up when we were talking about adding the 4 schools that joined, and then obviously when we added Colorado, which we're very excited about, it does spread your time zones and your geography quite a bit. And so you do take that into consideration and you think about the impact that that's going to have. Of course, football is not where it has the greatest impact. It has greater impact on all your other sports where they play more games or matches and that travel is probably more onerous. And I think that's where you begin to think about whether you have divisions or pods or something that kind of help manage that travel. I think it's a reason that you see people talking about maybe larger sizes of conferences as well as they become more national. But it is certainly a consideration. And as we think about scheduling, it will certainly be something that our athletic directors pay a lot of attention to in the conference office staff to try to minimize that burden as much as possible because we do want our student athletes to continue to be successful as students, and that's our highest priority is that they get an education and that they graduate. And so you want to make sure what you're doing from a scheduling perspective minimizes the impact on that as much as possible.
Dr. Linda Livingstone, President, Baylor University, the chairperson of the Big 12 Board of Governors, a part of that, what was important, that NCAA Transformational Committee. So right now, the Big 12 in 2024 has 13 teams. It could have 16 teams. Do you think that if the number was to get to 16, when everything becomes official, is that the cap number? Do you feel like what's the advantage of being at 13, 14, or 16?
You know, I think in some ways there are benefits to having even numbers of schools from a football scheduling perspective, from what I understand. I don't do football scheduling. We leave that to the conference staff and to the athletic directors. So I think that certainly is a consideration from a scheduling perspective. I think beyond that, the number of teams, there's advantages and disadvantages, of course, but I think that then you begin to look at, are these teams going to add value to the conference? Are they going to help us not just now from a competitive perspective? Are they going to help build the academic profile of the conference? And then are we positioning ourselves well for the next media rights deal? Because the media rights deals are becoming shorter and shorter. And so you really do have to think. You don't have 10 years to think about it. You have 5 or 6 years to think about it. And so I think you're thinking kind of long term about the stability of the conference, the quality of the conference, both athletically and academically. And then you also factor in what's the impact of this going to be on travel and on scheduling and on kind of the quality of life of our student athletes. And so all of those factors come into play as you think about what the right number is and then what are the right schools to bring on board. But I think you focus on the schools more than you do actually the number, and then you ultimately have to get to a number that works from a scheduling and travel perspective.
It's obvious the SEC and Big Ten, what they've done and what today Oregon and Washington are about to be a part of the Big Ten. When it comes to the college football money, do you feel like now that the Big 12 has done what they've done, with more news to come perhaps in the next 24 to 48 hours, that the same equal share of that college football money should go to the Big 12? Has that ever been in doubt?
Well, I know that as this, they're moving obviously to a 12-team playoff, and then after that, the rights for the CFP will come up for negotiation. And I don't sit on the CFP committee. That is one athletic committee I'm not a part of, so I don't sit in and have all the inner workings there. But I do know distribution of funds will be one of the pieces of the conversation there, and I think some of that conversation will be around whether the money is distributed across the power conferences by conference, which is the way it's done now, versus by the number of schools that you have. And so I think that will certainly be a point of conversation, how much it matters depending on what numbers all these conferences get to. It may not make a whole lot of difference at some point. So that will certainly be an important part of the conversation as that new media rights negotiation takes place for the CFP, is how those funds are distributed and how that plays out compared to how it works now. But I think we certainly feel in the Big 12 that will be an important part of that, and that will be certainly an important source of revenue for the conference going forward.
I want to go back to the size of the conferences and travel real quick. Do you see a future where, for the Olympic sports in particular, that travel becomes such a burden? I mean, if you look at what's going to happen to the Pac-12 with just USC having to go all the way to the East Coast to play softball games and probably have to stop over in Lincoln or Madison or East Lansing on the way back and be gone for a week, and all the things that they're going to have to do to get through that maybe the Olympic sports conferences becomes more regionalized again, and then the big money earning sports like football and basketball, men's and women's, can be the ones that are kind of the national traveling shows for everybody?
Yeah, I think we'll see some creative things. I certainly don't want to speak to what the Big Ten is going to do. I have no idea how they're thinking about that scheduling, but I think you'll see some creative thinking about it. And I mentioned divisions or pods that might be more regionally oriented, and you have some kind of a playoff system at the end within your conference to determine who qualifies for NCAA championship play. There's ways to manage when you play and how you travel. You see this in some other conferences, even in volleyball in the Big 12. We did this during the COVID. You ended up playing the same team twice in the same weekend, and then the next year, you might play at Baylor this year, and you might play at TCU next year. So you only had to travel once, right? And you played both games. Now, it's a little unfair because you've got 2 home games against the team one year and 2 away games the next year. But it does help manage travel a lot. Now, whether conferences will choose to do that, I think we'll see over time. And it might depend on whether they're trying to play geographically closer or they have a different model for how they want to schedule.
If, in fact, you get to 16, do you feel like the Big 12 is done expanding?
Well, I think that as we see what happens and what shakes out of the Pac-12 in the coming days, I think for now things will settle down a little bit. I know there's lots of talk around what's going on in the ACC as well. So, I think that's probably a little further out. And again, that's a wonderful conference. I think none of us want to see these great conferences disappearing like might happen with the Pac-12. So, I think things will settle down after we see what happens with the Pac-12, and then we'll kind of see where things go from there. But I don't know that anybody has anything specific in mind as it relates to further realignment at this point until we see kind of what happens with the Pac-12.
Was that ever a discussion within the Big 12 meetings about a conference not being the one that fires any kind of so-called kill shot at another conference? Because the Pac-12, the Big 12 has been under that radar or in that bullseye or scope before.
We are very empathetic to the impact what we do have on other conferences because it's happened to us multiple times. And so, you kind of have these sort of conflicting emotions because you don't want to see anything happen to a storied conference that's had years and years of great success and great institutions. And yet you need to look out for the best interest of your own conference, both short-term and long-term. And because we've been in the position of people leaving and people thinking we were going to die as a conference, you have great empathy for other conferences that are going through challenges and struggles. So, I think you kind of, as I said, are a bit torn over it, but know that you've got to figure out what's best for your conference for the long run. And while not really wishing anything negative to happen to other conferences. So it's kind of a challenging space to be in.
Dr. Linda Livingstone, Baylor President, with us on 365 Sports. Paul?
How different are the president's meetings when you are seeking to add to a bounty as opposed to scrambling to figure out what your next step is?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I'm, reflecting back on 2 years ago, I think in both of those situations with the Big 12, there was a lot of unity of focus that, 2 years ago, we really want to stay together. We need to have each other's backs. We need to figure out what's best for the conference. You're stressed about it because if you can't figure out how to make it work, that could mean you're not going to continue to be together as colleagues and as a conference. And so there's an urgency to it that may be a little different than when you're in a position later where you're stable and you're just looking at whether there's opportunities out there that we may or may not choose to take advantage of. You still want to do what's best for your conference, but you're not as concerned that it might keep you from existing as a conference in the near term. You certainly are thinking about what's in the best interest of the conference for the long term. But I think in both of those cases, there was a lot of unity and common commitment and values that helped drive the decisions. The urgency and the stress of it was certainly probably more when we were dealing with things after OU and UT made the decisions to leave.
Dr. Livingstone, Brett Yormark took over a year ago this week. I know you had a major part in the search to find a replacement for Bob Bowlesby. Nobody's perfect, but I know very well that you were immediately someone that wanted to make sure people did not overlook who he was or even what he didn't know or did know. And now looking back at that, was he the perfect hire? And how much of that support was from you when you decided he was next up in line?
Well, I just can't say enough about how happy we are with Commissioner Yormark. And I was on the executive committee that kind of served as a search committee for the conference that ultimately ended up recommending to the full board that we hire Brett in that process. I think we all knew that the world was changing so rapidly and that we had to have a commissioner that was going to think differently about things, was going to be proactive and aggressive, and maybe came from a little bit different background than it was historically the case in almost all of the conferences. And Brett just fit that bill, and we felt great confidence in him. He had some great ideas early on. He's very aggressive. So, I certainly don't deserve any more credit than anyone else does in that process. But I think we're all very pleased with what he's done. He's thinking big about the conference and what we can be and what we can do and how we can strengthen the conference athletically and in a lot of other ways, and certainly financially, even beyond our media rights. So the conference is very supportive of Brett, and we really look forward to his leadership in the years ahead.
Should the college football playoff run college football?
Well, I think that one of the challenges we have is thinking about, because college football is not independent in our institutions from all of the rest of our sports and from the rest of our athletic department and from the rest of the university. And so I think finding ways to work together and to collaborate between what the CFP does and what the NCAA does is a really healthy and good model. And, the NCAA is working on a lot of things internally on how we delegate responsibility down to the divisions and to the conferences. We're thinking about how some of the sport program committees, how they have a little bit more autonomy in what they do. And so I think as we do that work and we work with the conferences and the institutions on that, we're really trying to figure out how to simplify and streamline administratively what we do, decision making, and what we do that will help institutions and frankly our conferences navigate a lot of these things that we're doing. So I think, working closely between the NCAA and the CFP is probably a model that can be successful so that football's not so independent that it doesn't fit well or engage properly with our other sports on our campuses.
As a former student athlete, Dr. Livingstone, what are your thoughts about the partnership with players, perhaps even short of them being employees as we move forward?
Well, I think that we've got to continue to evaluate how we're supporting our student athletes and how we're ensuring that they're having the best opportunity they have athletically to be successful, and how they can have the best opportunity to be successful academically. And then what are the supports we need to provide around that, whether it's around health and safety, mental health, academics, financial literacy, and so many other things. And we've made a lot of strides in recent years in providing more support for our student athletes. Certainly, the educational benefits we provide now and what we call kind of the Alston payments, the full cost of attendance, has been significant for student athletes from a financial perspective. And then opening up NIL opportunities. We want our student athletes to have legitimate NIL opportunities. We do not want NIL to be used as inducement and not be true, legitimate name, image, and likeness support. Student athletes and employees is just very inconsistent with expecting our student athletes to be students first and athletes second, and to be designed to help them to be successful academically. Most of them are not going to be professional athletes, or if they are, they're not going to be professional athletes for most of their adult life. So we've got to maintain the integrity of the academic component of their experience, and putting an employment model on top of that just doesn't seem to align well with the importance of the student part of their experience on our campuses.
There is a report since we had you on about Arizona State, and Utah at least asking to join the Big 12. I know that there might be some more meetings. I know, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, that you can't specifically say something that's not yet official, but do you feel like today or in the next 24 hours could be a massive part of Big 12's future and also history?
Well, I'm not going to speak to any decisions that may or may not be made in the next couple of days, but I am very confident in the long-term health and well-being and success of the Big 12 Conference. We've positioned ourselves well. We've got great institutions, and I think we're extremely well positioned to be strong long into the future.
Dr. Livingstone, we appreciate all the roles. I don't know how you juggle them, but you're a part of a lot of the big ones, and we appreciate you for giving us the amount of time you gave us. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great weekend.
Happy to be with you today. Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Linda Livingstone, president at Baylor, chair of the Big 12 Board of Governors, a part of the NCAA Transformational Committee. What she does